So picture this scenario. It's the early 11th century, and you're standing in this really lavish, heavily guarded royal palace in Persia. And right in front of you is a high-ranking prince who is entirely, genuinely convinced that he is a cow.
Right, yeah, he's suffering from a really severe case of melancholia, which that was the medieval diagnosis for profound depression and psychosis.
Right.
So it's not just some fleeting delusion. This prince is severely malnourished because he's flat out refusing to eat any human food.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he spends his days just, on the floor, mooing and relentlessly begging the palace staff to slaughter him so that a good stew can be made from his flesh.
That's incredibly dark.
It is. It's a massive psychological crisis, and his body is just shutting down.
Right, and you can almost feel the panic rippling through the royal court. The staff is trying literally everything to break this delusion. I mean, they reason with him, they probably try to force feed him, nothing is working. So in total desperation, they bring in this highly reputed physician.
And this is where it gets fascinating. Because instead of arguing with the prince or, treating him like a madman, this doctor uses what we basically call clinical validation today. He essentially plays along.
Yeah, he sends a message ahead to the prince's quarters, right? Saying, tell him to be happy, the butcher's coming.
Exactly. Which completely shifts the dynamic in the room. When the physician finally arrives, he's holding this large, intimidating knife. He walks right in and demands, where's the cow so I may kill it?
And the prince just goes along with it.
Oh, completely. The prince excitedly moves to reveal his location and gets down on the ground to be slaughtered. So the physician approaches, inspects him really closely, running his hands over the prince's ribs, and then he just shakes his head in disappointment.
Because he's too skinny.
Right. He turns to the staff and announces, the cow is too lean, it's not ready to be killed, it must be fed properly, and I'll slaughter it when it becomes healthy and fat.
Which is just a brilliant trick, and it works flawlessly, right? The prince eagerly starts eating all the meals they bring him because he fully believes he's just, fattening himself up for the butcher.
Yeah, and as he regains his physical strength, the chemical imbalances in his body actually begin to stabilize. The delusion fades, and he's completely cured.
It's like applying the rules of improv comedy, that yes and technique, but using it to literally save a man's life.
It really demonstrates a staggering understanding of the mind-body connection. I mean, this physician recognized that you can't simply argue a patient out of a deeply held psychosis. You have to enter their reality, manipulate the rules of that reality, and treat the psychological root to fix the physical symptom.
And the brilliant mind behind that intervention is the focus of our deep dive today. So for you listening, our mission today is to trace the path of a man who is widely considered the father of early modern medicine.
Ibn Sina, or as he's most commonly known in the West, Avicenna.
Right. We're talking about a philosopher and a scientist whose ideas profoundly shaped the Islamic Golden Age and honestly laid the absolute groundwork for the European Renaissance.
Yeah, and we so often fall into this trap of picturing historical philosophers as these quiet, sheltered scholars, right?
Yeah.
Sitting in peaceful monasteries just surrounded by dusty scrolls.
Like monks or something.
Exactly. But Avicenna's life violently shatters that stereotype.
Violently is definitely the right word. He is arguably history's ultimate multi-hyphenate. I mean, he was a political refugee, a vizier, a target for assassination, and a fugitive.
Yeah.
He wrote some of the most influential scientific encyclopedias in human history while actively hiding from local authorities or, locked inside a military fortress or literally fleeing across deserts to escape invading armies.
It sounds like an action movie.
It really does, and it makes you wonder, how does a person even begin to build a resume that spans from discovering the core principles of quarantine to serving as a medieval prime minister, all while keeping one step ahead of executioners?
Well, to map that out, we have to look at the environment that forged him. Because long before the political chaos, he was a child prodigy, just absorbing the raw data of a booming cultural hub.
Let's set the scene for that. Where are we?
So he's born around the year 980 in a village called Afshana, which sits near the city of Bukhara in modern-day Uzbekistan. This is during the Samanid Empire.
And Bukhara wasn't just some random dot on the map, right? It was a massive intellectual capital.
Oh, absolutely. It was on the Silk Road, completely rivaling Baghdad at the time. Information, trade, scholars, they were all flowing through it constantly.
And his family was pretty well connected, from what I understand.
Yeah, his father was a local government official, and he recognized almost immediately that his son possessed this terrifyingly capable memory. By the age of 10, Avicenna had perfectly memorized the entire Quran.
10 years old. That's unbelievable.
Right. So his father begins bringing in various tutors to feed this intellect. Interestingly, though, Avicenna learned his foundational arithmetic not from some high-born scholar, but from an Indian greengrocer in the marketplace.
I love that detail. Knowledge wasn't just locked up in the palace, it was out in the streets.
And he absorbed all of it. Eventually, this visiting philosopher named Al-Natili moves into their home, and under his guidance, the young Avicenna dives into the heavy mechanics of Greek thought. We're talking Aristotle's logic, Ptolemy's astronomy, Euclid's geometry.
But the tutor hits a wall pretty quickly, right?
He does. Pretty soon, Al-Natili realizes he is completely out of his depth. He simply advises the teenager to pursue his research independently because there's nothing more he could teach him. So by the time Avicenna is 18 years old, he is completely self-taught in all the known Greek sciences.
Let's just put that level of prodigy into perspective for you listening. It would be like a modern teenager casually mastering quantum physics, advanced neurosurgery, and, I don't know, constitutional law, just hanging out in their childhood bedroom.
That's a great analogy. And what separated him from other bright students was his capacity for synthesis. You see, the Islamic Golden Age was defined by this immense translation movement. Texts from Greece, Rome, India, Persia, they were all being translated into Arabic.
A massive influx of data.
Exactly. Many scholars read them, obviously. But Avicenna looked at them and saw the underlying matrix. He had the cognitive architecture to take Aristotelian logic, Indian mathematics, and Persian medicine, and basically wire them all together into a single, cohesive operating system for understanding reality.
And that raw processing power pays off really quickly, but it also kind of paints a target on his back later on. Because at just 17 years old, his reputation as a physician is so formidable that he's actually called in to treat the ruler of the Samanid Empire, Nu II.
Right, and he successfully cures the ruler and is offered a reward. But instead of asking for wealth or land, Avicenna asks for something far more valuable to him, unlimited access to the royal libraries of the Samanids.
Which is huge.
It's massive. This gave him the keys to one of the greatest repositories of human knowledge on the planet at that time.
But as we see throughout history, tying yourself to a king is a huge gamble, because in the year 999, when Avicenna is around 19 years old, the entire Samanid Empire completely collapses. It's overrun by invading forces. Everything he knew, his entire support system, just vanishes overnight.
Yeah, his high status suddenly flips from an asset to a deadly liability. Being a favored intellectual of the old regime makes him an immediate target, so he's forced to flee. And this begins a brutal, nomadic period of his life driven by sheer survival, or what he simply called necessity.
And it sets up this terrifying reality. I mean, in the 11th century, you couldn't just apply for a university tenure track somewhere else. You needed a patron. You needed a warlord or a king with enough money to feed you and a big enough army to actually protect you.
Exactly. So he travels from city to city, constantly seeking stable patronage. He makes this grueling journey west to the city of Gorgon, specifically seeking out a renowned patron of the sciences named Cobus. He survives the harsh winter travel, arrives at the court, only to be told that Cobus had literally just died.
I mean, the timing is just darkly comedic. He makes this massive trek and nope, the guy's dead. You have to pivot again.
Right. So he keeps moving. Eventually he lands in cities like Ray and Hamadan, and he goes back to his strongest card, which is medicine. He successfully treats a local ruler, Majd al-Dawla, for melancholia.
Kind of full circle back to the psychology stuff.
Yeah. He gets absorbed into the inner circle there, and then the ruler's brother, Shams al-Dawla, basically forces Avicenna to become his vizier.
His vizier. So he is suddenly the prime minister of a volatile state. Wait, we have to pause here. Why is a doctor leading military campaigns and managing state business? That seems like a massive leap.
It does to us, sure. We view doctors and politicians as entirely separate spheres today, but in an 11th century royal court, those boundaries really didn't exist. The state was viewed as a complex organism, very much like the human body.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if a ruler found a mind capable of diagnosing a failing liver with flawless logic, they naturally assumed that same exact mind could diagnose a failing tax system or negotiate a treaty. Logic was the ultimate universal currency.
It makes sense conceptually, but practically, it places a scholar directly in the line of fire. I mean, the sources describe him literally clashing with mutinying army troops while trying to manage state affairs.
Yeah, he's basically dodging swords while trying to ponder the nature of the cosmos.
And the volatility is inescapable. When his patron, Shams al-Dawla, eventually dies of colic, the political winds shift instantly. Avicenna flatly refuses to serve the heir who takes over.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Let's look at the logistics of that decision.
Yeah.
Refusing a medieval ruler isn't like, putting in your 2 weeks notice at a corporate job.
No, it's treason.
Exactly. Avicenna becomes a wanted fugitive. He goes into deep hiding in the house of a local apothecary, and he secretly begins corresponding with a rival ruler, Allah al-Dawla, plotting an escape to the city of Isfahan.
So he's trapped indoors, a wanted man, knowing that discovery means imprisonment or even execution. And how does he cope with all that stress, he writes?
Naturally.
According to the historical record, while he's hiding in this apothecary's house, he wrote an astonishing 50 pages a day to draft parts of his massive philosophical encyclopedia, the Book of Healing.
Yeah.
I cannot get past the mechanics of that. He is a fugitive living out of a back room. He doesn't have a library. He doesn't have assistants handing him reference scrolls. How on earth is he drafting a comprehensive encyclopedia of human knowledge?
He's doing it largely from memory. The foundation he built as a teenager in that Samanid royal library was so structurally sound that he could mentally walk through those texts years later. He had just completely internalized the data.
But his luck does run out, right?
Yeah.
The local authorities eventually intercept his secret correspondence.
Yeah, the apothecary's house is raided, Avicenna is dragged out, and he's thrown into the dungeon of the Persian fortress for 4 entire months.
But this physical isolation somehow only pushes his mind further inward. Because it's inside this dungeon that he develops one of the most elegant and famous thought experiments in the history of philosophy. It's known as the floating man.
Yeah, the setup for this is just brilliant.
So for you listening, I want you to imagine a scenario. The floating man thought experiment. Imagine you were created spontaneously, right in this very instant, midair. You have absolutely no memories, you're blindfolded so you can't see, and you are falling through a perfect void without any air resistance, so you cannot feel the wind against your skin.
Right, and your limbs are splayed apart so they aren't touching each other.
You are stripped of every single external sensory input. You can't smell, hear, touch, or see. You don't even have the sensation of gravity. So it's basically the ultimate sensory deprivation tank in zero gravity, floating in a vacuum. And Avicenna asks the reader, in this complete absence of physical sensation, would you still know that you exist?
And he argues that the answer is undeniably yes. Even without the awareness of hands or a heart or a physical environment, you would still possess a pure, uninterrupted consciousness of your own self.
The implications of that are massive.
They are. Because if your self can be known completely independent of the physical body, then the self, the consciousness, the soul, must be an entirely separate immaterial substance. He effectively separates the hardware from the software.
He proved the existence of an immaterial soul using pure deductive logic, just stripping away the physical world until only awareness remained. And the crazy thing is, this predates René Descartes by 6 centuries.
Right.
Descartes is globally famous for, I think, therefore I am. But Avicenna was sitting in a freezing Persian fortress, using a blindfolded, floating man to deduce the exact same truth about human self-awareness hundreds of years earlier.
It's incredible. And he actually survives those 4 months in the fortress. Eventually, the rival ruler he'd been contacting, Allah al-Dawla, successfully captures the region.
So Avicenna is finally freed.
He is. He moves to Isfahan, where he finally finds a stable environment. And it's here that he finalizes the works that will absolutely dominate global science and medicine for the next 700 years.
Right, so the 2 massive pillars of his legacy are the Canon of Medicine and the Book of Healing. And we should clarify the titles here because they are notoriously confusing.
Very confusing.
The Canon of Medicine is his 5-volume medical masterpiece. But the Book of Healing, ironically, has nothing to do with physical medicine. It's a sprawling encyclopedia covering logic, mathematics, astronomy, and physics. The title actually refers to curing the soul of ignorance.
Yeah, he viewed ignorance as a disease that required a logical antidote. But let's examine his physical medical breakthroughs in the Canon first. One of his most vital contributions is his work on infectious diseases. Avicenna postulated that diseases could be transmitted from person to person through invisible, tainted organisms.
Visible organisms.
Yeah, and based on this, he actively recommended the isolation of sick individuals to halt transmission, which is the fundamental basis of quarantine.
But wait, how on earth did he figure out invisible organisms transmit disease centuries before the microscope was invented? How do you map the rules of epidemiology when the pathogen is completely invisible?
Well, you observe the effects and you work backward. Avicenna noted that a sickness could move from person A to person B even if they never physically touched, simply by occupying the same space or sharing the same water source.
Okay, so just looking at the pattern.
Right. Logic dictated that there must be a physical medium, some invisible particulate carrying the affliction through the environment. He deduced the existence of pathogens purely by tracking their footprint.
That is wild. And he applied that same meticulous observation to cardiology, didn't he?
He did. He mapped out the human pulse, categorizing it not just by speed, but by volume, rhythm, and elasticity. And he actually used this to diagnose what he called love sickness.
Love sickness.
Yeah. If a patient was wasting away, he would monitor their pulse while casually reciting the names of different local towns, streets, or people. He essentially operated like a human polygraph machine.
Oh, that's brilliant.
When the pulse violently spiked or fluttered at the mention of a specific name, he knew he had found the psychological trigger causing the physical wasting. So again, it's treating the mind to heal the body.
And outside of medicine, his work in the natural sciences is equally startling. While studying optics and how the human eye perceives light, he tackled the nature of light itself. He reasoned that if light is the result of particles being emitted from a source like a fire or the sun, then that emission is a physical event.
Right. And any physical emission, no matter how fast, must travel through space. Therefore, Avicenna deduced, the speed of light cannot be infinite. It must have a finite speed.
It's like comparing throwing a baseball to turning on a lantern. They're both physical actions. They both require time to cross a room. He logically reasoned his way to the finite speed of light in the 11th century.
It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And he applied this same expansive thinking to the earth beneath him, too. In his geological writings, he observed mountains and concluded they couldn't have simply always existed. They had to be formed either by violent tectonic upheavals like earthquakes, or carved out over unimaginably long periods by water erosion.
So he was grasping the concept of deep geological time, far beyond the standard biblical timelines that were accepted by his contemporaries.
Because he was a staunch empiricist. He trusted what could be measured, observed, and logically proven. Which is why he drew a hard line against the popular pseudosciences of the day.
Yeah, alchemy was a massive pursuit back then, the belief that you could magically transmute base metals like lead into gold. But Avicenna flatly rejected it.
He wasn't having any of it.
None of it. He argued that lead and gold were fundamentally different species of matter. You could dye them, melt them, or change their appearance, but you could not magically alter their core substance.
He basically established a strict boundary between rigorous chemistry and mystical wishful thinking. In fact, his practical chemistry experiments led him to invent the process of steam distillation. He figured out how to extract essential oils from flowers, creating rose essence, which he actually utilized in aromatherapy to treat heart conditions.
But, this unyielding reliance on logic and empirical proof made him a highly controversial figure, particularly in the realm of theology.
Right, because religion and philosophy were deeply intertwined.
Exactly. Avicenna was a devout Muslim, and he firmly believed that pure logic and Greek philosophy were perfectly compatible with faith. He believed he could use Aristotle's tools to logically prove the existence of God and map out the mechanics of the universe.
And to give some context for you listening, we're just reporting the historical debate here without taking sides. But to an Orthodox theologian at the time, elevating human logic to the same level as divine revelation is a deeply threatening concept.
Oh, very threatening. He debated fiercely in public squares and made some powerful enemies. Critics accused him of arrogant blasphemy. They even claimed he tried to mimic the sacred stylistic structure of the Quran in his own writings.
And that backlash lasted long after his death, didn't it?
Yes, centuries. The highly influential theologian Al-Ghazali explicitly targeted Avicenna's work. He wrote these blistering critiques of Avicenna's attempts to blend Greek philosophy with Islamic theology. Al-Ghazali even officially branded several of Avicenna's specific philosophical conclusions as pure unbelief. It was an all-out ideological war over the soul of Islamic thought.
It's fascinating to see how a mind that sought to synthesize everything ultimately became the dividing line for centuries of debate. But despite his ability to see the underlying code of the universe and his total mastery of human medicine, Avicenna could not outrun his own biology.
No, he couldn't. He spent his final years in relative comfort and stability with his patron Ala al-Dawla in Isfahan, but he had suffered from bouts of severe colic throughout his adult life.
Which is really intense, painful abdominal complications.
Right. And in the year 1037, while he was actually accompanying the ruler on a military campaign, the condition returned with a vengeance.
The tragic irony of that is almost too perfect. The man who literally wrote the canon of medicine, the physician who could trick a prince's mind to save his body, who mapped the pulse and deduced the mechanics of invisible pathogens, ultimately succumbed to a stomach ailment that he couldn't cure in himself.
Yeah, he died at the age of 56 or 57.
Which is young by our standards, but his output was monumental. I mean, he's believed to have authored around 450 works, with about 240 of them surviving the centuries.
And his philosophical frameworks traveled far beyond the Islamic world. They deeply influenced major Western thinkers like Thomas Aquinas.
You can clearly see the reverence the Western world held for him in the 14th century, too. When Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, Dante actually places Avicenna in limbo.
Which is a huge sign of respect in Dante's worldview.
Exactly. In Dante's theology, limbo was a space explicitly reserved for the absolute greatest, most virtuous non-Christian thinkers in human history. Avicenna is placed right there alongside Homer, Socrates, and Plato.
He really served as the intellectual bridge, carrying the wisdom of antiquity through the chaos of the medieval period directly into the dawn of the modern world.
Avicenna was never just a name on a dusty manuscript. He was a survivor who weaponized his intellect. He synthesized the knowledge of the East and West while dodging armies, negotiating with volatile kings, and writing encyclopedias from inside prison cells. He trusted the power of human observation and unyielding logic even when the entire world around him was actively collapsing. Which leaves you with a lingering question. Think about what this one mind achieved with the primitive tools at his disposal. If a man in the 11th century, armed with nothing but his own observation, pure deduction, and translated scrolls, could accurately deduce the finite speed of light, map the mechanics of quarantine, and prove the immaterial nature of consciousness, what massive fundamental truths about our universe are sitting right in front of us today, completely invisible, just waiting for the right mind to finally connect the dots?